They said I was nothing but a leech, a daughter who didn't deserve a single piece of what my grandfather built. In that courtroom, in front of the judge, my own parents looked me in the eye and demanded everything: the house, the accounts, even the right to decide how my grandmother would be cared for. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the kind of wound that never heals, the kind that makes you realize family can cut deeper than any stranger ever could. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story, filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. The probate courtroom in Santa Fe was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel like a trespass. I sat at the petitioner's table, 55 years old, and feeling every bruise of betrayal that had brought me here. Across from me, my parents, people who had once taught me to say please and thank you, now stared as if I were a thief. My brother Travis sat between them, his smirk sharp enough to cut. Their lawyer's voice rang out, cold and rehearsed. Your Honor, we contend that Elaine Mercer exerted undue influence over her late grandfather, manipulating him into altering his will. We are asking the court to revoke her claim to the estate and transfer all property, assets, and authority of care to the rightful family members, her parents and brother. The words landed, like stones. All property, all authority, everything, not just the Taos cabin my grandfather had poured his hands into, but the bank accounts, the savings, and the right to decide what happened to Nana Ruth, my 84-year-old grandmother, who could barely remember what day it was. I didn't argue. Not yet. Years of silence had taught me that sometimes the only power left was timing. So instead, I rose slowly, every eye in the room tracking me, and placed a heavy black case, sealed, stamped, unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what it held, on the judge's bench. A ripple went through the courtroom. My parents shifted uneasily. Travis's smirk faltered for the first time. The clerk leaned in, squinting at the red seal on the latch. Chain of custody intact. Your Honor, number 24/7-13B. His voice carried across the room like a drumbeat. The judge adjusted her glasses, studying me with measured curiosity. Ms. Mercer, we'll get to the contents of this box in due course. Please be seated. As I lowered myself back into the chair, I caught the bailiff's eyes. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the door, as though already anticipating something no one else in the room yet understood. And in that moment, I felt the faintest shift in the air, the kind that whispers, they think they've cornered you, but the game hasn't even started. 9 months earlier, life had already started to unravel in ways I couldn't ignore. Working part-time as the family company's bookkeeper meant I saw every number, every paycheck, every government loan that was supposed to keep us afloat after the pandemic. But the numbers didn't add up. The payroll protection program loan my grandfather had carefully applied for, money meant to cover wages during the shutdown, had vanished without explanation. The balance sheets showed it had arrived, but the corresponding disbursements had no trail. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Family businesses were messy, and I had learned to expect chaos. But then I noticed that payroll stubs had been altered, dates shifted by just a few days, figures rounded in strange ways. Employees supposedly paid were quietly let go months earlier. It was like staring at a painting that looked perfect from afar, but broke apart into cracks. The closer you got, the worst blow came when a credit bureau notice arrived in my name. A new line of credit had been opened in Texas, attached to my Social Security number. I remember sitting in my kitchen that night, the letter trembling in my hands, thinking, someone in this family just made me the fall guy. My gut told me who, but I needed proof. It didn't take long for the truth to show itself. The manipulator was Travis, my brother, the golden son, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. He was drowning in debt, a trail of failed ventures and expensive toys. And my mother, Lila, didn't just look away. She backed him. I confronted her once, timidly, hoping for denial. Instead, she told me, "Family takes care of family, Elaine. Your name is stronger on paper than his. It's just business." Her words sliced deeper than any ledger line ever could. She had chosen him, again, at my expense. But the betrayal went further. When my father, Martin, produced a new will, the final nail seemed driven into place. It left the Tao's cabin, the accounts, and decision-making power to my brother, effectively erasing me. He waved it around the kitchen table one evening, as if it were gospel. "This is the way it should have always been," he declared. Yet something caught my eye. A notary stamp in the corner, angled oddly, as though rushed. I checked the date. My pulse hammered. The stamp marked a Sunday, a day no notary office in New Mexico was open. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had faked the very foundation of the inheritance. In that moment, I knew the fight ahead wouldn't just be about money. It would be about truth, and whether I had the courage to stand against the people who had raised me. By the time I sat across from Miss Calder, the attorney I had hired, the weight of secrets pressed down on me like a stone. She listened carefully as I laid out everything I'd uncovered. Altered payroll, phantom loans, the forged will. When I finished, she didn't look shocked. She looked deliberate. "Elaine," she said, her tone measured but firm. "If you want this to stand in court, your evidence has to be airtight. No shortcuts, no casual storage. You'll need a sworn affidavit for every document, a record of how each piece was obtained, and a sealed chain of custody. If you don't, they'll tear you apart." That night, I typed out affidavits until my eyes blurred. Every file, every bank letter, every screenshot was cataloged, signed, and notarized. I packed it all, along with the hardware wallet ledger I had retrieved, into a black Pelican case. When I snapped the latches shut and sealed it with tamper-proof tape, I felt like I was locking away my entire life. It wasn't just evidence anymore. It was my last line of defense. The first shock came when a friend in IT helped me trace the hardware wallet. The wallet address wasn't random. It matched one already flagged in a federal wire fraud investigation. My family's dirty dealings had crossed state lines, drawing the kind of attention no one walks away from. Then, in a stroke of arrogance, CPA Nolan made his mistake. He sent my brother a draft email that auto-saved to the wrong shared folder. Buried inside was a screenshot of a late-night transfer schedule, proof that the stolen PPP funds had been shifted into shell accounts while the rest of us slept. But the final twist cut the deepest. At a downtown bank in Albuquerque, I requested access to a safe deposit box my grandfather had rented. Inside, wrapped in a brittle envelope, was the real will, signed 2 years earlier. In his own hand, he had written, "For Elaine, who will care for Ruth." I remember clutching the document as my throat tightened. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen his final words, his trust. And now, for the first time, I knew the truth was strong enough to stand on its own. The air inside the probate courtroom was brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. My parents' lawyer stood tall, his voice booming with false certainty. "Your Honor, this so-called will should be dismissed. The respondent, Ms. Mercer, manipulated an elderly man who no longer had full mental capacity. She orchestrated his decisions, and she has no legitimate claim to the estate." The words echoed off the adobe walls, each one meant to bury me. Across the aisle, my mother's face was twisted with self-righteousness. My father leaned forward, hands clasped, like a man who believed the victory was already his. And Travis, his smirk had returned, smug and sharp, the grin of a man who thought no one could ever touch him. When the judge finally turned to me, her voice was calm but edged with expectation. "Ms. Mercer, do you have a response?" I rose slowly, letting the silence stretch, my palms pressed against the handle of the black case. For a moment, the weight of it nearly broke me. Months of doubt, betrayal, sleepless nights. But when I set the case on the evidence table and popped open the latches, the sound was sharp, deliberate, final. Gasps rippled across the room. Inside lay stacks of sealed files, flash drives, affidavits. and a hardware wallet glinting under the fluorescent light. "Your Honor," my attorney, Ms. Calder said firmly, stepping beside me. "This is a composite exhibit, filed under sworn affidavit. Every document has been notarized, cataloged, and sealed according to chain of custody protocol." The clerk stepped forward, reading the tamper-proof number aloud. "Seal intact. Number 2247913B. He handed the documents to the judge with trembling hands. The judge adjusted her glasses, flipping through the audit trail first. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the QuickBooks logs. "This shows entries deleted at 217A by user Travis Mercer." A murmur surged through the gallery. Next came the bank letters, subpoena responses confirming transfers into shell companies in Texas. Then the affidavit from a second notary who had examined the new will and testified the stamp. Date was impossible. Finally, Ms. Calder handed over the hardware wallet, its serial number logged and cross-checked against federal databases. The judge paused. She looked at me, then back at the ledger. Slowly, she spoke into the microphone. "Court takes judicial notice of the federal case number attached to this wallet's address. This matches an ongoing wire fraud investigation currently under seal." The room froze. My father's jaw dropped. My mother's eyes darted wildly as if searching for an exit. Travis shifted in his chair, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the table. And then came the moment that changed everything. The bailiff, who had been stationed quietly near the door all morning, pressed a discreet button on his radio. He gave the faintest nod toward the back of the courtroom. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallway. The gallery went still, every breath suspended in the air. For the first time, my family seemed to understand. The lies they had built their power on were no longer theirs to control. The black box had spoken louder than any of us ever could. The sound of the courtroom door bursting open was like a gunshot. Every head whipped around as a line of dark-suited agents swept inside. The gold lettering of FBI and the steel badges of U.S. Marshals catching the fluorescent light. The air shifted instantly. What had been a probate hearing just seconds before was now a scene of federal enforcement. "Travis Mercer," the lead agent called, his voice crisp, unshaken. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes across state lines." Travis shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "This is insane. You can't." His protest was cut short as two marshals pulled his arms behind him and snapped the cuffs shut. His smirk was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling mask of disbelief. CPA Nolan, seated quietly near the back, as if he were only an observer, didn't escape either. Another agent strode forward, holding up a warrant. "Robert Nolan, you are under arrest for aiding and abetting federal fraud, falsifying financial documents, and obstruction of justice." The accountant's face drained of color. He fumbled for words, but nothing came before the cold click of cuffs silenced him. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Someone dropped their notebook. Even the judge's gavel couldn't fully calm the storm of whispers. My parents looked as if the ground had caved beneath them. My father, Martin, slumped forward, his shoulders hollow. My mother, Lila, clutched her handbag with white-knuckled fists, her lips muttering, "This can't be happening! This can't be happening!" The lead agent approached them, but spoke in a measured tone. "Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, you are persons of interest in this investigation. You are requested to accompany us for questioning." It wasn't handcuffs, not yet, but the implication was heavy enough to bow their heads in shame. Through the chaos, I stayed seated, my pulse steady for the first time in months. Beside me, Nana's frail hand trembled. I reached over and wrapped mine around hers, squeezing gently. "It's okay, Nana," I whispered. Her cloudy eyes flickered toward me, searching for something familiar. She didn't fully understand the storm around us, but she felt the steadiness of my touch. That was enough. The judge, regaining control, struck the gavel 3 times. "Order! This court remains in session." Her voice carried authority that sliced through the uproar. She shuffled through the documents once more before speaking. "Given the evidence presented, and considering the validity of the original, will retrieved from the safe deposit box. This court recognizes its authority as binding. The estate, including the Taos cabin and financial accounts, shall remain under the terms expressed by the decedent, entrusted to Ms. Elaine Mercer. A pause. Then her eyes softened slightly. Furthermore, in recognition of the decedent's explicit intent and the current condition of Mrs. Ruth Mercer, this court grants guardianship and decision-making authority over her care to Ms. Mercer, effective immediately. The courtroom seemed to exhale all at once. My parents sagged in their chairs. The power they'd wielded for years stripped away in a single judgment. Travis shouted from the back as agents dragged him toward the door, his voice breaking. "You'll regret this, Elaine. You'll regret—" The door slammed behind him, cutting his words in half. I sat still, Nana's fragile hand still in mine, my other hand resting lightly on the black box. For the first time, I didn't feel like the abandoned daughter or the scapegoat. I felt like the one person in that room who had carried truth all the way to the end, and the truth had finally spoken louder than their lies. A week later, the world felt almost unrecognizable in its quiet. The storm of the courtroom, the handcuffs, the chaos, all of it had given way to the stillness of snow drifting outside the windows of the Taos cabin. The fire snapped in the old stone hearth, its glow painting the walls in amber. I sat in the armchair nearest the flames. Nana curled beneath a quilt beside me. Her breaths were shallow but steady, each one reminding me of why this fight had ever mattered. On the mantel above us sat the black box, closed, silent, unassuming. To anyone else, it might have looked like just a case, but to me, it had become a symbol, not of victory, not of vengeance, but of what truth looks like when it is protected, honored, and finally heard. I thought back to all the nights I had stayed awake cataloging documents, stamping affidavits, pressing seals. At the time, it had felt like desperation. Now I saw it for what it truly was. Preparation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was what allowed justice to stand on its own feet when my family tried to twist it into something unrecognizable. Nana stirred beside me and whispered, almost childlike, "Is it over?" I pressed her hand and nodded. "Yes, Nana, it's over. You're safe now." Outside, the snow fell harder, covering the pines and the old trail my grandfather used to walk. The land he had cherished, the home he had built, would not be divided or sold off in bitterness. It would remain what he intended, a place of care, a refuge. I rose and adjusted one of the framed photographs on the wall. It was of him, hammer in hand, building this very cabin with his sleeves rolled up, sawdust in his hair. He had never been a man of speeches, but he believed in leaving things better than he found them. That was his legacy, and it was the one part of him my family could never forge or steal. I glanced again at the black box. For days I had wondered whether to store it away, to hide it in the closet, or send it back to my lawyer. But I left it there, on the mantel. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, quietly, in the hands of those patient enough to carry it. The fire popped. The snow kept falling. And for the first time in years, the world around me felt steady. I leaned back, holding Nana's hand, and let the silence settle in. Not a silence of fear or betrayal, but one of peace, the kind that comes when truth has finally done its work. There are moments in life when silence feels heavier than any shout, and when the weight of betrayal threatens to crush even the strongest spirit. Yet history and human experience both remind us of a timeless truth. The loudest voices are not always the ones that endure. What endures is the evidence of integrity, the steady hand that refuses to bend, and the quiet courage to stand firm when everything else seems to fracture. The struggle between justice and deception is as old as humanity itself. Families, friendships, even entire communities can be torn apart by greed or fear. But what remains constant is the resilience of truth. Lies may flourish for a season, supported by intimidation or manipulation, but they eventually collapse under the gravity of fact. And when truth finally rises, it doesn't need to shout. It simply stands, unmovable, undeniable. We often imagine justice as something grand, delivered with trumpets and applause, but real justice, the kind that transforms lives, is usually quieter. It comes from persistence, from the willingness to prepare, from the discipline to carry proof rather than anger. It doesn't require dramatic speeches. It requires patience, courage, and a belief that what is right will reveal itself if protected long enough. There's also something deeply human about the idea of boundaries, the recognition that loyalty without limits becomes self-destruction. To set boundaries is not betrayal, it is self-preservation. And sometimes, it is the only way to ensure that the cycle of harm doesn't continue. The lesson is simple, though not easy. Respect for oneself is the foundation of respect from others. This story, like so many others, is less about what was lost and more about what was gained. The reclaiming of dignity, the restoration of balance, and the reminder that even in the darkest betrayals, light can return. The journey may leave scars, but scars are not signs of weakness. They are evidence of survival, of lessons learned, of battles endured and won. When we step back, we realize that life is not about avoiding pain. It is about transforming it. Betrayal becomes clarity, injustice becomes accountability, and silence, when filled with preparation and truth, becomes the most powerful voice of all. So as we close this chapter, let it serve as a reminder. No matter how loud deception grows, no matter how hopeless the fight may seem, truth remains patient. It waits for its moment. And when it speaks, it does not need anger. It only needs to be seen. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share in the comments what part of this story resonated most with you. Your reflections help build a community where stories like this truly matter. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next tale of resilience, justice, and the quiet strength of truth. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and remember, when truth finally arrives, it never whispers, it resounds.